Welcome to Prairie Politics, where we prepare for your next political conversation. I'm Jeronimo Cortina, a political science professor at the University of Houston.
And I'm Brandon Rottinghaus, also a political science professor here at the University of Houston. Thanks for hanging out with us and talking politics. I think this is kind of a pivotal week, actually. There's a bunch of things that are happening in D.C. and in Texas that really are unique and definitely are going to show kind of what's to come. So at the national level, federal level, the kind of budget proposal passed that the House has been negotiating for several months. In Texas, we're seeing, I think, a real pivot point on things like the vouchers fight. Also, the state lottery is a bit underwater. The scratch off has basically led to $0. So we'll talk about all these things. But I want to get your take on the way that the kind of federal government is working. So one of the big things, obviously, in this week was that the House passed a budget resolution by a very, very slim margin. It's a bit of a miracle this happened, right? The miracle on the Potomac. But I do think that this was something that we can really give credit to Donald Trump for, because Trump spent a lot of time talking about the budget the way he wanted it. He was able to get the Republican Party in line. He probably saved Speaker Johnson's job, who all week was looking for divine intervention. Well, he got it. Right. It came from the White House. This is only going to bolster kind of Donald Trump's efforts to try to get the Republicans in line. And obviously, it's going to be something that's, going to really set the stage for how the budget's going to be treated. So what do you make of the passage of the budget resolution?
Well, I mean, very simple, right? One is President Trump used President Johnson, LBJ, move, work the phones, probably very late.
Some lapel grabbing.
Yes, probably. And I mean, it shows that, first of all, he has control, even for the people that were against increasing or not having enough substantial cut.
Yeah, because several of these members had said they weren't going to vote for the resolution and were adamant about it, like no qualms, but they ended up switching. But I think you're exactly right. There was a lot of complications to this budget. Members either said that the tax cuts were not permanent, and that was a problem. The cuts generally in the budget were too much. The cuts were not enough. The budget tight cap was too high or too low. So members had all kinds of problems, and that put Johnson in the middle of the kind of moderates who are really worried about what's going to happen in the midterms, and the more hardliners. Yeah, and it's coming. And the hardliners who say, like, we need to really kind of press this because time is short. Like you say, I mean, the midterms right around the corner, and they want to make sure they get this in the mix. We're going to talk in a second about Donald Trump's joint address to the Houses of Congress, but this is something that he's going to have to and want to brag about. So let me ask you this. I mean, getting back to Trump, the question is, do you think that Donald Trump's kind of, the sort of umbrella is big enough to cover these members who are going to have to explain to their constituents that there are going to be these massive cuts and there is going to be a tremendous increase in the debt and the deficit?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I mean, I see two possibilities. The first one is that those members are going to be voted out in the midterm elections. And who's going to replace them? There's obviously two chances.
The swing districts are going to be replaced by Democrats.
I mean, either they vote for Democrats, right, and they lose control for at least the House, or they're going to be replaced by hardliners, completely 100% backers of President Trump, which is less likely to happen.
Yeah.
So that is a big risk. Because then for the second part of the administration, there's going to be deadlock as we were with the Biden administration.
Yeah.
And nothing is going to get done.
That's true. Yeah, and I mean, President Trump's not exactly happy with this, right? He said that he wants to see fewer cuts to Medicaid. He said that he wants to have more tax cuts. He's also floated the idea of a balanced budget, which is just, I think, practically impossible. Yes, that laugh is exactly probably what most Republicans did, because that's not a practical outcome, given especially all the other things that are on the menu.
And the problem is that there is no enough places to cut.
Yeah.
Unless you do Medicare, which is nope.
It's
Social Security, nope. And defense spending, nope.
Yeah.
So the proportion that you're left to cut is very small. Even when you look at the federal workforce, that represents around 1.5% of total spending. Is not enough money. And the argument about waste, fraud, et cetera, is not basically, getting very transparent in terms of the amount of money that they potentially, presumably, allegedly have found.
Right, that's exactly it. Yeah, the ledger doesn't look quite as positive at the bottom as it did. This is an issue, I think, when it comes to how you sell this to voters.
That's the key.
Well, you said last week, DOGE is popular and the efficiency in government is always going to be something people like.
Yeah.
But when it comes down to the actual nitty gritty, it could be a problem. The other thing is that the notion, the prospect, the idea of like efficiency in government or cuts to government is broad enough that you're going to see that being used as a way to say, okay, we're saving on Medicare, we're cutting Medicare, but we're also saving technically. So it's really about efficiency. That's going to, I think, really have to be carefully tailored because you can only cover so much of a political argument with the sort of we're being more efficient, we're cutting out waste.
Right.
When people start to feel like, okay, I'm not getting
the
what
reality,
I used to get. Yeah, and that's a real issue. So there's still this. The other thing is that this still has to go to the Senate, right?
Yeah.
And the Senate, I think, had some serious objections and or some additions that might not be relevant. So Tommy Duckworth from Wisconsin added an amendment to the Senate bill that said that they wanted to pay for IVF treatments, which Donald Trump promised he would do. That is probably not going to be something that is like budget possible. The other thing is that the amendment in the Senate skinny version had an addition that said basically we're going to try to cut a lot like the way the House budget's going to look. That amendment failed. So that means that the Senate is really not on the same page when it comes to the House on those cuts. So that's going to have to be something that they resolve. And it's going to possibly be resolved when Donald Trump takes the dais and is giving a speech to the joint session of Congress. Can he use his joint session appearance to convince Republicans, especially in the Senate, that they should back his version of one big, beautiful bill?
I mean, yes and no. I mean, already, those senators that are 100% behind Donald Trump. Then you have the senators that might be behind Donald Trump, and then the senators that you have that are most likely not going to support him. And he's going to be a senator from Alaska, senator from Maine, saying, I don't know, maybe, right? So that's a complication. And the other issue is how likely the Senate, in terms of re-election prospects, are going to be. So if they're safe, maybe not. I mean, John Cornyn, for instance, right? John Cornyn is in a complicated position right now. And we're going to see if he's going to stand up and how they make an argument in terms of basically the financial stability of the country. That's going to be what matters.
I noticed you didn't mention any Democrats in this, which to me makes a lot of sense, right? Because
sure.
They're almost irrelevant.
Right.
And even if they weren't a kind of legislative player in the current Congress, there has been this theme for presidents in terms of communication that they really only speak to the base. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that also when presidents talk about outpartisans in negative ways, it increases the public's view negatively of those outpartisans. So really, Donald Trump can do two things, right? He can talk badly about Democrats, which ramps up Republicans locally. That is a plus for him when it comes to the midterms. But he's also able to make sure he keeps his party unified. So there's a kind of going partisan atmosphere here that the president can use as a national scale to be able to convince those reluctant Republicans to join him. And in some sense, the Democrats are kind of irrelevant. Really, they're just kind of like going to get hit by shrapnel on this. And that's just the problem for the out party. So there's really no persuasion of them that's going to be able to move the needle here because effectively they're just sort of on the outside looking in. Obviously, President Trump's got a lot more to say. Thematically, he wants to say, this is sort of reoccurring, as we've seen from the first administration, an effort to make America great. He'll outline some of his vision for that. But what else is he going to say?
Well, obviously, potentially about the deals that are coming in terms of the war between the Ukraine and the Russia invasion. Right now, things are looking possibly for a deal that the U.S. is going to get some minerals and gas deals, and I don't know what else.
Zelensky's coming this week to the U.S. to sign the deal.
So we're going to see, obviously, relations with Europe are not in very good shape.
The incoming German chancellor said that we're 5 minutes to midnight, which is a reference to the old Cold War countdown clock. that power vacuum is going to be meaningful. But here's the thing. To me, Donald Trump can think really short term on this. You can think basically in the span of 1 year where you can accomplish a lot of the things you promised. And even if it's not perfect, right, you can still basically get DOJ to do a bunch of cuts. You can get immigration reform. You can get the budget that you want, including the tax cuts that you had promised. That's a winning kind of arrangement. And people may be definitely unhappy about things, and there's no question that it's going to have an effect on the ground. But at least in terms of the promises that he's made and the kind of tone that he wanted to set, he's basically done that.
Absolutely, and he has to do it this year because you don't know what's going to happen in 26. Yeah. That's one of the most important things. And the other thing is that the way that he communicates it using, trying to swing public opinion is what matters, speaking directly to voters, is he has to be very careful in terms of how he caters those wins with reality. Yeah. Right? And reality basically doesn't mean, let's say, immigration deportations or anything like that, because that's kind of, 30,000 feet above the ground. Yeah. But it's going to be, are you paying for cereal more or less? Yeah. For gas more or less?
Can you get the extra egg at the Waffle House?
Exactly.
I'm not made of
money. So those are the issues that are going to be confronted, because at that moment, voters are going to say, but wait. You're saying that you had inflation under control. Yeah.
That's a great point. I mean, the president is prone to exaggeration, and overpromise on these things could be a real problem. Now, in a campaign, overpromising is one thing, but when you're governing and people are actually paying attention, it could be very different. So we'll see how he ends up on this, but it's going to be a pretty pivotal moment, I think, for him. As we saw with the budget.
Absolutely.
But let's talk about a different Senate issue, and that's involving U.S. Senator Ted Cruz from Texas. The Federal Election Commission has dismissed a complaint against him 5-1, basically over a podcast that he received profits for in the form of money to his super PAC. I guess I should clarify that it's not money going to him, it's money going to his super PAC. And the question before the commissioners was basically whether or not there was some collusion between Ted Cruz and the super PAC and or iHeartMedia, which was the company that runs the podcast that paid the super PAC. Correct. They found that there was no relationship, and therefore it was all hunky-dory. Now, you and I know that you can make millions of dollars on podcasts. Right? This is we're swimming in money, just really pushing off advertisers, embarrassingly so.
Sorry.
But in this case, Ted Cruz got basically about $1 million donation from iHeartMedia to the super PAC, which of course benefits Ted Cruz, right? The race in Texas in 2024 wasn't particularly close, but certainly was the case that Ted Cruz had a sizable war chest and was able to use that effectively to beat Colin Allred. To me, this is also a complication because we're still in the Wild West when it comes to campaign finance. This is still, I think, a set of rules that are sort of unclear, probably that skirts the law, that's legal, but definitely challenges it on its sort of face, and it creates some implications to what happens in the future because so many members now have all kinds of ways to, communicate to their constituents. So it could be in the form of a Substack, it could be a podcast, it could be a digital series, it could be a book that they write. And the question then is sort of how much are they going to get? How much is the super PAC going to get? The FEC didn't kind of clarify this except to say that, the member can't be the one who's making the request. But, Ted Cruz was at some of these meetings and they didn't think that was sufficient enough. So it would have to be like a real smoking gun in order for this to come out. So for now, at least the FEC has said this is all fine.
Right. Yeah, and again, the big question is there have been changes at the FCC, and the question is if it's being, still a neutral body that is going to regulate these things. Yeah, and that is a big question, right? Because the problem with institutions is that once they get politicized, it's very difficult to depoliticize them.
That's true.
And goes for both Republicans and Democrats, because when Democrats go and get in those seats, which will happen eventually, I don't think that they're going to be like,
well, these are the rules. Well, and that's it. I mean, the FEC is playing strictly by the rules, and that's probably the fairest thing to do. But at the same time, it opens up lots of these kinds of things that maybe they hadn't intended. But honestly, that's just kind of the way of things. And it's like I said, this legally at least works for now, even if it creates all kinds of problems down the road. Speaking of problems, let's talk Texas. Now, I know you're a big lottery player, scratch off addict, right? Just trying to chase that.
Yeah, I have my lucky penny for the scratch offs.
And you got your numbers, right?
Yeah.
It's like, you're going to win one of these days. I feel it.
Oh, thank you.
But the better chance...
Can it be soon?
Hopefully it's soon. The better chance for you to win is to join a mega conglomerate and have them buy up all the tickets and then have that be your payoff. So that might be a little farther off for you, but the scratch offs, you can definitely, pay for some eggs if you're lucky.
Yeah, it's a big thing where the lieutenant governor has been deeply involved, making a side visit to the place, investigating like what's going on.
With his own phone and the staff recording him. He's making phone calls to the attorneys. So a lot happened this week, right? I mean, normally it's the case that like the lotto only makes headlines when there's a huge jackpot win, but there's been a lot of bad headlines for lottery at the very worst moment for them. So here's a few. The first is that the Lottery Commission basically is conducting an internal investigation, responding to lawmakers' questions about whether or not they're basically just laundering money for these big mega corporations that are out there buying a bunch of the tickets through these courier services and then effectively, winning the lottery. Dan Patrick said this is a problem. Paul Betancourt is, asking these questions, saying effectively he thinks there's a 90% probability that this is just sort of money laundering and that has to stop. The lottery announced that they are going to nix the courier services after Dan Patrick threatened to do away with it. The governor has said that he's going to direct the Texas Rangers, the badge, not the bat, to investigate. There's just a lot of brewing kind of controversy around this scandal at the very worst time for the Lottery Commission, where it's in session, where if you make legislators mad, uncomfortable, if they have questions at the very period, the only period they can do something about it, then you're definitely in danger. And the other is that they're under sunset right now, which in Texas government is something that happens every 7 years for agencies. They're reviewed kind of, soup to nuts to figure out, kind of how the agency is working, what agency functions are doing well, what need to be stopped or transferred. So this is really kind of their review, like their performance review. And it's not going super great. So what do you think about the implications to all of this emerging swirling scandal around lottery?
Well, I mean, obviously, technically speaking, what the couriers did is perhaps not illegal. Yeah. But once again, you're getting into the cracks of the legislation, and you say, well, it's kind of suspicious.
Well, that's what Dan Patrick implied. He was on the phone to one of the attorneys for the courier service and said, like, is this the way you think the lottery should run? Like, it doesn't seem very fair. And a lot of lawmakers are asking the same question.
Absolutely, right? I mean, obviously, winning the lottery, the probability that any regular folk like myself is going to win.
But I'm going to win, though, right?
But no, I know you will. If you profit sharing with me.
That's true. Let's join forces.
It's very low, right?
Yeah.
But still, I mean, people like to play it. The scratch off is like adrenaline right now. Maybe I'm going to hit it. Maybe not. Maybe, I don't know.
The games are fun.
Right.
And I think people, though, want to be convinced it's fair. And the problem is that people are not convinced now that it's fair.
Right, exactly.
And so that's one issue that they're going to have to address. But this has been something that the lottery has done for a long time. All the lottery commissioners have been chosen by Greg Abbott. So he was like, I'm shocked to see that this is happening. Well, you appointed all of them. So this is definitely falling on your desk. So the appointment of the Texas Rangers to do something about it definitely is related to that. But here's the other implication. And we've talked a little bit about this over the course of the last couple of episodes. And that's that the ledge is considering expanding legal gaming. So it might be casino destination resorts. It might be the online gaming. It's a very likely possibility this is going to happen. Literally, yesterday I got a text message, I'm sure a lot of people did, that was like, legalized gaming is sort of lucrative for Texas, and there's like a little video with it, right? So the lobbying forces are out, and I think that this scandal jeopardizes the ability for that to pass, because
100%.
Members look at this and they say, well, wait a minute, we can't even run the lottery, which we've had since the 90s. How are we going to run an even more lucrative, even more expansive agenda on this, where we have to really be sure that there's no kind of criminal element that seeps into it. There are serious controls over kind of people's ability to operate within this. So there's just a lot of, I think, now problematic outcomes when it comes to getting gambling passed.
Absolutely. And if it stinks, people are going to stay away from it, regardless of the money that potential lobbyists pour into the session.
Yeah, so
and
true.
especially, obviously, since, as you said, Governor Abbott appointed the members of the Lottery Commission, and he's going to be more careful, as he should be.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm not going to get myself into this mess without first knowing what is really going on with this. And I think that's a fair assessment.
Yeah. Well, one thing that people have said is that if the state pursues the educational savings accounts or vouchers, then there needs to be a dedicated revenue source to make that happen. It's possible that expanded gaming could be that. Now, lottery, of course, is tied to the public ed system. So some of the money from the proceeds from the lottery goes to public ed. And that was something that was built into the cake a long time ago. It's not a lot of money, but destination gaming would definitely bring in more money. And so a lot of lawmakers are kind of tying these things together, at least in sort of hypothetical practice. And the debate over vouchers, over educational savings accounts is heating up. It's to some degree Abbott versus everybody. He has been fighting with Democrats on Twitter. He's been making speeches. He's talked about Mary Gonzalez from Clint, the member of the House who's got an EED, saying she's a fake doctor. He's fighting with Gina Hinojosa from Austin, saying she has her facts wrong. James Tallarico has been a big opponent of vouchers. Abbott's against him. So I think we should just print T-shirts that says, Abbott versus everybody. He is not alone, though, right? A lot of Republicans are really trying to generate enthusiasm about this. We're seeing Donald Trump weigh in on the voucher story in Texas. Elon Musk, who is obviously a government employee, sort of, making the rounds, talking about how he wants to see, ESAs in Texas. So this has become a national fight. The question is, do you think in the current form we're going to see some passage of this in the House?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, how the cake or the salad is going to turn out at the end, who knows?
Yeah.
But I think that, Speaker Porras had signaled that, we're going to do vouchers this session.
Yeah.
But we don't know how it's going to look at the end.
Yeah. Now, Burrows's approach to this is slightly more inexpensive than what the Senate has asked for. Basically, Burrows has asked for about $3,000, $4,000 less. The goal is to tab how much the ESAs get to what the public ed funding is. So there is a kind of incentive for public ed per student funding to go up. That also is part of what they plan to do. So the Texas two-step, they're calling it, House Bill 2 and House Bill 3, basically does a combination of these things. In addition to some other changes like reducing the time for the STAR test. And my kids who are still taking the STAR test could not be happier about less STAR testing. But obviously that's another kind of implication because that's how school districts are judged. So there's still this kind of big question about what education policy will look like, but definitely something is going to pass. And I guess the question is there enough accountability built into this to make it work? I mean, there's a concern that basically that, speaking of the STAR test, that public schools don't have to do the STAR test. And so the students in there may or may not qualify. They may or may not meet the standards that we expect them to meet.
That's private schools. Private schools.
And when it comes to, special needs kids, are they going to be taken care of in the way that the state demands? Lots of accountability questions that haven't been rooted out because they're still trying to figure out the finances of it. So how is this going to play out?
Well, the more accountability is, the question here is, or the way that I see it is very simple. If you're going to make these private institutions accountable to what similar to what public institutions, public schools are, that's the same thing.
Yeah.
Like, it's exactly
the same thing. Why not just give the money to, Conroe ISD?
Exactly. Why are you, what are you doing is duplicating the thing, right?
Yeah.
And also we have to take a look back at the current state of the public education system is that, remember, in, 2007, 2008, they took away, the state legislature took away a lot of billions of dollars from the public education system. So the big question is, why should we be not focusing first on giving that money back, the full thing with interest included or whatnot, and see where these public institutions are? I'm not against or support school vouchers or ESAs. I'm right in the middle. I'm just looking at the policy implications in a way that you can create a double system where you're putting money left and right for achieving the same thing. So can we think it in a different way where the ultimate goal is to have kids that are prepared for whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of this is the politics of it, right? I mean, and the Republicans have had some
Sorry, I was thinking just in public policy.
News? Yeah.
Oh,
wow. It turns out it's all about politics. But Greg Abbott definitely has incentives to do this. He's looking at his legacy. He wants to be the governor who brought the educational changes you're talking about to Texas when people walk by his portrait in the Capitol. Obviously, he wants to keep up with other states. Iowa, Arizona, Virginia have all moved in this direction. He wants to be in that same mix of those governors. He got 0% at the CPAC straw poll for who should be the next president. He'd like that number at least to be in single digits. So obviously that's an incentive for him to make a splash on the national level. And money, right? I mean, it's maybe too obvious to say that campaign donations move the needle in Texas, but they almost always do. Jeff Yass has given him $10 million. He's a billionaire investor from Pennsylvania, and this gets mixed up in all the politics of this. So the money is an issue. The accountability is an issue. There's still lots of questions about this, but I think that's why the Republicans are pushing so hard for this, because they know that there are just lots of questions they have to answer, and they'd like just to get the vote and get things moving and then figure out the details after.
Yeah, but I mean, figuring out the details is going to be, the devil is in the detail.
Yeah,
and it's risky because it implies a lot of money that we may or may not have in the future, and stuff that we just don't know if we're going to do it or not. Yeah. So, but this is going to be another issue that we're going to be trying to disentangle for the next couple of weeks. I'm Jeronimo Cortina.
And I'm Brandon Rottinghaus. The conversation keeps up next week.